Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Yoda Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, I feel like we got to take care of a little bit of business here as we're approaching the NFL draft coming up here in April. In terms of what the Chargers are working with right now, I think the Chargers have one of the more complete teams that you're going to find in the NFL, but I do think there are some needs that are flying under the radar for some Chargers fans. We're going to get into a lot of those positions in today's video, but I do think looking ahead into the future and finding players in the draft to address future needs is also going to be something very important to pay attention to as the draft does approach. So it should be a good one today. We're going to go over every single position on the Chargers roster, kind of go over what those needs are going to inquire, if that team or if that position is good, and maybe looking towards the future as to what the Chargers need to do to prepare for futures to come, because there's some positions on this list that I'm telling you right now are going to need some immediate help going into the 2023 season. And again, there are going to be some positions on this list that maybe on the surface don't look like a huge need right now, but would certainly turn out to be a big one as the season does approach. So before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. You know what I did yesterday? During the offseason, it can be one of the most boring parts of the season for me outside of football, right? We still keep up with the draft in the offseason, and that's enough to keep us entertained for a while. I decided to take my first leap and my first steps into maybe the NBA a little bit, more specifically because I do enjoy Underdog Fantasy so much, which does cover all pretty much sports that you can find out there. And I had a really good time cheering for them Jazz last night. Again, I was kind of like a kid in a puppy store. I really had no idea what I was looking at. I was just having a good time, but it was pretty fun throwing down. I think I put down one slip right here, which didn't end up hitting, but it did provide a good time and help me pay attention a little bit. So I had a lot of fun with that. If you guys want to get in on the NBA season, follow my journey of discovering the NBA a little bit this year. Use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. Should be a good time. Now, before we do get started, guys, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this position breakdown. Lights, camera, action. Your 2023 Chargers position breakdown video while trying to identify some of our biggest needs going into the draft. Now, this is something I kind of lightly covered in my first mock draft video. You guys can check that out. It was posted a few days ago. But this is something I kind of wanted to go in depth with you guys in terms of what some of our biggest needs really are. There's going to be some positions that we go over. It's like, yeah, we probably should grab a guy this season to address that. But there's also going to be like players that would make the biggest difference for the team, like maybe running back or a speed wide receiver. Some of these things are going to have to be weighed come April. So let's jump right into the first position. Again, we're going to go position by position, kind of tell you guys what we're looking at with that position and maybe what we can do to improve it going forward. Starting off with the quarterback position, Justin Herbert. I feel like we're good. I feel like we're definitely good with Justin Herbert. But the one thing that we do have to address is the backup quarterback position. We're not going to have Chase Daniel. We're not going to have Easton Stick more likely than not. That is something that I think the Chargers are going to make a signing for in free agency this offseason. Again, the Chargers, $20 million over the cap. It doesn't mean that we can't make moves. Be it very small, maybe budget, the Coupon Tom style moves. We're still going to have to make a few of them. And I think backup quarterback's going to be one of them. Of course, you can go into the draft and draft a guy, a rookie, to sit behind Justin Herbert. But in the end, you're going to want somebody with a little bit of experience, especially in our new system. May I propose to you guys Cooper Rush, who would be following his offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, to the Los Angeles Chargers? I think it's a done deal. Not really, but I do think it's the most intelligent pick you can make in terms of a backup quarterback. I think it's something that Cooper Rush would do. I think it's something that Kellen Moore would enjoy, and I honestly think that's a really solid backup quarterback for the Chargers when all's said and done. And, you guys will remember some of those guys out there in Dallas, the fans, screaming for Cooper Rush to maybe even be their quarterback for the rest of the season while Dak was, suffering that injury. He definitely could work. So I like Cooper Rush as a backup. Some people say he's going to be be too expensive. I disagree. I think, again, backup quarterback is something that you're definitely going to want to pay a little bit of something to because he is your contingency plan. But at the same time, I feel like it's something very achievable by the Chargers, and I do think Cooper Rush, at least in my opinion, is probably the best backup quarterback you can bring in given the circumstances of the Chargers' new OC. Next up, let's talk about the position of running back. And this is one that actually has some layers to it, right? It's not just, we got Austin Eckler, everything's great, which it is this season, I will say. Austin Eckler, I think, is so underrated by not just, Chargers fans, maybe not so much, but the NFL as a whole. Is it criminal that this man has yet to make a Pro Bowl after scoring how many touchdowns over the last 2 seasons? It's got to be well over 40. That's absolutely ridiculous to me. And the fact that people don't really view Austin Eckler as an RB1 in this league is almost personally insulting. I took that personally, okay? Chargers fans, you count your lucky stars that we got Austin Eckler on this team. He is our true RB1, maybe not a bell cow, but he serves a very important role for this team. And I think the biggest role of that being the man scores our points. This is the dude that puts up the touchdowns for the Los Angeles Chargers, and he is very, very good at it. Now, that being the case, like I mentioned, there's some layers to this. What about our backups? We got Joshua Kelly, RB2, which I see a tremendous amount of potential going into the future with. If Kellen Moore wants Josh Kelly to be the RB2, I think he's going to make a heck of an RB2, given the system that we saw in Dallas with Zeke and Pollard. I think you could translate that right now with the Chargers running backs on the roster. Pretty impressive. Then you got a guy like Isaiah Spiller, not Simmons, Spiller, director. You guys may have caught that the last couple of videos. Sorry, I play a little bit of Madden Ultimate Team. Easy to get those guys confused. I think Isaiah Spiller certainly still has a lot of potential. We didn't really even get to see that, right? I feel like with rookies that take time to develop or maybe see a lot of time on the bench the previous year, some people may shove them under the rug a little bit, sweep them under the rug and kind of forget about him. I still think Isaiah Spiller is a great talent, and it's one that I do think could contend for that RB3 role, maybe even RB2 going into the future. It's just something you have to be patient to see in terms of his talent. So what are we talking about in terms of any complications here, right? Director, looks like we're good. We got 3 solid running backs. I think Eckler and Josh Kelly are going to be great. Well, the biggest thing that I'm looking at is Austin Eckler himself. Eckler's only on contract with this team for 1 more year, right? And my first instinct is to be like, Chargers, let's go ahead and get this man a blank check and sign with our name on it and let him sign it, see what kind of number amount we're looking to, because I don't want to see Austin Eckler go anywhere anytime soon. But it's something that we got to think about. Now, again, my first instinct is to extend this man, which is going to help our cap, maybe even just a little bit this season. It could lower his cap this season to something like $2 million. Ensure that we have Austin Eckler for the next 3 years at least, I'm hoping. But the other option that some people are throwing out there is the possibility of going after Bijan Robinson. That is literally the only case scenario where I'm okay from with the Austin Eckler in terms of maybe we pass the torch after this season, right? Let's get some reps behind Austin Eckler. You take possibly the best talent in all of the 2023 NFL draft, and you find a future at the running back position for the Bolts. Now, again, my preference is certainly to extend Austin Eckler, but the talent of Bijan Robinson and the impact they can make for any team, because, again, just a light refresher on Bijan Robinson. The dude's a freak. He's like Saquon Barkley mixed with Christian McCaffrey. He's absolutely complete. He's fast. He can catch. He can run between the tackles. Outside, whatever you ask him to do, he can do it, probably to an elite level. I feel like that's the only case scenario where I'm like, okay, we can at least wait and see what we want to do. Because in the immediate future, you're looking at Austin Eckler paired with Bijan Robinson. That's absolutely nuts to me. That's something that I feel like Eckler would benefit tremendously from. It ensures the Chargers' future at the running back position. But outside of that, I really hope that he sticks with the Chargers for as long as possible. I'm looking for an extension more often than not here. So there is a little bit of conversation to be had behind the running back position. Even that being said, though, I think more likely than not, we keep Austin Eckler this season, base value, base minimum here, and then we consider an extension after this season. All right, so there's your running back position. Definitely a little bit more in depth than I was planning for, but it's one that I think is very important because Austin Eckler is really one of those identities of the offense for this Chargers team. What would this team look like without Austin Eckler for the past, 3, 4, 5 seasons? Not as many touchdowns. I'll tell you that right now, not as many touchdowns. Next up, let's take a look at the position of fullback, I should say. Fullback, I feel like we're good, right? I just had to put Xander Horvath somewhere here on the video. The only reason I'm putting him on this video is to tell you guys we need to use this man a little bit more, okay? I feel like Xander's going to be a special talent in the NFL when it comes to the fullback position. I would like to see him a little bit more involved in terms of, early down work maybe sometimes, but, especially, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, 1 yard to score on the goal line. I feel like we've got a stud in there that we need to utilize and throw into the system a little bit more aggressively. So I like Xander Horvath. I think we're absolutely fine there. Next up, the position of tight, or I should say wide receiver. We're getting tight end here, just say wide receiver. Now, again, this is going to be one of those positions that carries a bit of controversy because of the Chargers. I would say rumors going into the NFL draft coming up here in the next couple of months. Now, we got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer. That's 3 pretty solid wide receivers, right? I would say even one of the more solid in the entire NFL. But outside of that, we don't really have Jalen Guyton anymore. We moved on from Tyron Johnson years ago. We got some backups in there that are okay. I don't think even Michael Bandy's on their roster this season. Of course, you could sign him cheap. But in terms of the Chargers wide receivers right now, I feel good about it, but there is a lot to consider here. The first thing I'll say, in terms of the whole Keenan Allen thing, if you guys haven't heard, there's a lot of talk about the Chargers either cutting or trading Keenan Allen. I strongly disagree with that. I think Keenan's going to be a Charger this season, but I cannot deflect the possibility that the Chargers' cap issues this season would largely be solved if the Bolts decided to move on from him. Now, I'm gonna be willing to find a middle ground here, okay? I feel like the Chargers should absolutely not move on from Keenan this year, but if they do need to fix their financial troubles going forward, next season would make a lot more sense. You're taking a much lower cap hit in terms of dead money, and you're getting a much bigger return in terms of what you're using. And also, Keenan Allen was graded as one of the best wide receivers in the league last year. Why would we move on from him right now? So your middle ground, we need to keep Keenan this year, okay? But that doesn't mean that we cannot prepare for the future. Let's say the Chargers are looking to move on next season. Maybe they think of, keeping him a couple of years. Well, still, you're going to want to bring in a guy that can help the Chargers and find a new identity, because Keenan Allen's, those are hard to come by. Those kinds of wide receivers that are just there for their quarterback whenever asked, when they're there for the 3rd down conversion, when they're there as Mr. Reliable, you don't find those often. So I would say start preparing now. And fortunately for the Chargers, they've been a pretty popular pick in terms of number 21 in the 1st round at wide receiver. You got guys like Jalen Hyatt. You got guys like Zay Flowers. You got guys all over the place in terms of wide receiver that make a lot of sense for the Chargers. Now, me personally, Zay Flowers is my favorite. But why would it be important to draft him right now when we do have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer? Well, it's because, let's say the Chargers do need to move on from Mike next season. You do have a man that can step into a role. I would say Zay Flowers stepping into a wide receiver 2 role right away is very realistic. And on top of that, a wide receiver with the traits of being a burner, right? With the traits of having a lot of speed, something that the Chargers very much so do not have on the roster right now, that could really unlock a new version of this offense. Whether Keenan is on it or not, adding speed would only benefit Justin Herbert and this offense as a whole. So I think, honestly, you cannot go wrong in the 1st round if you're the Chargers in drafting a speedy wide receiver. And I think there's speedy wide receivers to be found all over this draft. You got guys like Jalen Hyatt, who I don't think is going to fall deep into the 2nd round, but he could be a 2nd rounder. You got guys like Tank Dell, who's going to be, I would say, one of those vastly underrated speedsters in the draft. Maybe not the fastest guy, but you guys got what I mean. We don't have a lot of fast guys on this team. And drafting somebody this season in preparation for seasons to come, whatever the Keenan situation may be, is a very intelligent move to secure your future, as well as adding options to unlock the offense this year. That's why I think wide receiver is something that you certainly need to consider this season in the draft. 1st round, 2nd round, I would say a top 3 pick minimum. You need to add some wide receiver talent to the roster. All right? Next up, time to get into the tight end position. We already did the wide, so the tight end position. And this one, again, has a little bit of asterisks next to it in terms of what the Chargers can do this year in the draft, okay? So we've got Gerald Everett and Trey McKitty. That's pretty much it. You got guys like in the background like Stone Smart and stuff like that. Of course, you're going to find talent like that. But Gerald Everett, I would say he had a good season, right? A lot of people are like, let's get rid of Everett right now. Let's cut him. We'll save $4 million. I feel like the Chargers have Everett right now to do what Everett needs to do for this team this season. The team needs something this year at tight end, and I like Gerald Everett. he did exactly what we were asking him to do last year, right? He's not going to put up Antonio Gates numbers. He's not going to put up Hunter Henry numbers, but he's going to be there as one of those additional weapons for Justin Herbert, who does enjoy having a good tight end. I think Gerald Everett is a very good tight end. However, we only have him on contract for one more season. And the position of tight end, more often than not, takes a little bit of time to develop after being drafted into the NFL, right? We've seen huge talents like, Kyle Pitts come into the NFL and really put up some serious numbers, even considering his quarterback, situation. But more often than not, you're going to find tight ends that need a little bit of time. So even if the Chargers do decide to go in on a tight end this season, maybe it's not even a first rounder, right? I feel like having a guy like Gerald Everett this season is something that could definitely benefit the Chargers right now while we transition a new tight end into the league. But now some of you might be asking, Director, what about, Donald Parham? He's going to be a stud, right? He's actually not on the roster right now. I do think we'll end up re-signing him. He shouldn't be too expensive, but I do think this definitely opens up the door for a stud rookie to enter this team and find some success in the future. Because I do think tight end is an underrated need for this team. I'm all about going after Dalton Kincaid in the first round. Huge fan, obviously, of Michael Mayer. And then there's a slew of other tight ends, which I think is a deeper position in this draft that I would be very, very happy with, like a Sam Laporta, right? Maybe in the second, third round, you never know what you're going to find. So I think tight end may end up being something important to the Chargers. I think our situation right now is solid with Gerald Everett, but I do think taking advantage of this last year with Everett and finding a rookie is something that I would certainly support. So with that being said, let's get into the defense a little bit. This should be a little bit quicker, right? Or I should say the offensive line, while we keep getting ahead of ourselves. The offensive line, Slater, Sawyer, Lindsley, and Zion. Okay, those are going to be your 4 stud starters on that offensive line. The big question mark has been, are we re-signing Trey Pipkins, right? This may end up being the #1 priority for the Chargers, as this may be the first complete offensive line that we've seen rolling into the season in a very, very long time. And I think this is largely due in part to the return of Rashawn Slater. I'm telling you guys right now, the difference between having a stud left tackle and not having a stud left tackle is huge. Sure, the Chargers offense looked pretty good last season, right? Not great, but good. If you add in a Rashawn Slater to a lot of those situations throughout the entire year, I'm telling you right now, it looks completely different. So Slater, that's going to be a big, big return to the team. But you also got to pay a lot of respect to our guy, Jamari Sawyer. He actually changes a lot of what you can do this offseason as well. Sawyer could be moved to right tackle. He could start at left guard. I don't think he's going to be a backup this year. That talent put on display last year in relief of Rashawn Slater was heroic. So I think the emergence of Sawyer opens up what you want to do and maybe pushes up a priority like Trey Pipkins up your board in terms of free agents you need to re-sign. So right now I'm going to say Chargers, I would say it's a 50-50 shot we get Trey Pipkins back. And I do think it should be a huge priority because, again, going in at question mark at right tackle, not something I want to do. But other than that, the Chargers offensive line looks really, really, really solid. All right, finally, let's get into the defense. Starting with the defensive line, Sebastian Joseph-Day, Austin Johnson, Otito Ogbonia. We don't have guys like Christian Covington anymore. Even Brendan Fayoko is a free agent for the Chargers. He should be one that we can re-sign pretty cheap. I hope that he stays with the team. But this could end up being an underrated need. Now, of those top 3 guys, I like them a lot, right? I like Sebastian Joseph-Day a lot. I like Austin Johnson, who should be returning from injury. I like Tito as a run-defending defensive lineman, right? I do like a lot of these guys. And I do think we can improve the Chargers' run defenses, which is why we're talking about this position, with a bit of adjustments to scheme, right? I've been thinking a lot about the Chargers' defensive scheme and being such a aggressive shade of the Vic Fangio system. If you go take a look at the Vic Fangio system in the past, you'll notice that a lot of those systems, be it as good as they look against, very good quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes or, those guys that are very versatile, as good as they are versus the past, a lot of them do struggle on the ground. And I do think finding a middle ground is something that the Chargers need to do with their defense in order to help that stat, rather than bringing in a ton of studs at defensive line. Now, it's something I think the Chargers should definitely consider in the draft this year. I think you're going to find some really nice guys in the first round. Outside of that, though, I think it does drop off quite a bit more than we've seen in seasons past, but that does not mean we can't go in there and grab a 3rd round, 4th round defensive lineman to help bolster that unit just a little bit. But from what I've noticed with Brandon Staley and the way he started shifting things at the end of the year, I think that the unit could be moving towards something that's a little bit more friendly to defending the run. So as of right now, I'll say I'm okay with the defensive line, but it could end up being an underrated need because of a lot of the guys that we had to move on from. Speaking of that, linebacker. This is going to be a big one, guys. we're all hoping for Drew Tranquil to return to the team. It could be my number one priority as a Chargers fan. I don't know if there's a bigger difference maker on defense than there was Drew Tranquil. However, we got to take a realistic approach to this. We got Kenneth Murray. We got Nick Neiman. We got Amin Agbombamiga. Outside of that, I'm not really sure what we got. Damon Lloyd a little bit. It really feels like the Chargers and their value in the linebacker position has really been put forward with last season's decision to move on from Kaiser White. And that makes me very worried about Drew Tranquil and his status going forward with the Chargers. I hope that we get Tranquil back, but us as Chargers fans, we got to be prepared for us to move on from him, which would mean that the Chargers more than likely are going to have to find somebody to step in. I think Kenneth Murray, he saw some flashes, but for the most part, maybe underwhelmed. We'll have to go out there and find somebody, whether it be through the draft free agency. I really hope that we keep Tranquil on the roster. It's going to be a big position of need that's flying under the radar for the Chargers. So keep that in mind. I don't know as far as answers. There's a couple of guys in the draft I have my eye on, but linebacker is really hard to draft. You'll have to keep an eye out for it, okay? Especially the kind of linebacker that the Chargers would be looking for in their system. Now, next up, we got to talk about edge. Now, on the surface, once again, this is something we shouldn't really worry about, right? We got Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. We got a backup in Chris Rumph, who's certainly been all right. I think the Chargers should be really excited. Its fans should be really excited to see what this duo really has to offer next year. We got robbed of the Mack and Bosa duo really being put into effect in 2022. But I'm telling you here, guys, right now, that this could end up being a huge, huge need. Maybe not this season, but maybe next season. The Chargers' money problems, they're not going to stop this year. And that's all due in part to the big contract coming up for Justin Herbert. That's coming. And it's probably going to happen here in the next 3 or so months. Okay? And that's going to create some money issues for next season that could involve moving on from Khalil Mack. It didn't make sense to move on from him this year. I still think if it were up to me, he stays on the roster this year. Very excited to see him. Very excited to have him. But next season, we could be looking at a situation where it's Joey Bosa and who? Because we won't have Khalil Mack. This year's draft is probably one of the deepest that we've seen at the edge position in a long time. So much so that you can find a guy at 21 that could be a top 3 edge rusher in next season's draft. That's how deep this position is this year. The Chargers could be very wise in drafting a replacement for next year, as well as a backup for this year, kind of filling in that Kyle Van Noy role in preparation for what could be around the corner. That's why I'm telling you guys right now, don't be too shocked if edge in round 1 ends up becoming a possibility. I think it's a very big possibility because there are some really, really good options for the Chargers late in the first round that would make a big impact going into the future and then loosen a little bit what their situation could look like at edge going forward. So keep that in mind. So this season, I'm feeling really good about it. I would still expect the Chargers to go draft at least a backup in the later rounds if we don't go in the first 3 rounds. But at the same time, maybe you take advantage of the depth at that position in the draft and prepare for the future. All right? Next up, let's talk about the cornerback position. We got Asante Samuel Jr., the ascending Asante Samuel Jr., who's been one of the biggest steals for the Chargers in the second round in a long, long time. You got J.C. Jackson, and you got Mike Davis. And I'm also going to throw in there Jasir Taylor at the position, too. I think he's shown enough flashes for me to say, okay, maybe he's something that we can work with going forward. Now, this position as a whole, I would say is one of the stronger on the roster, but I would say that is contingent on JC's health, right? JC Jackson was kind of a big bust for the Chargers in free agency this last year. He looked really rough at the top of the season. He had that weird surgery, the preventative surgery or something like that going into the season. It ended up definitely hurting his start to the year, and then ultimately it went down in flames with that horrible injury. We're hoping that he's recovering and that he's ready to go next year, but a lot depends on his ability to not only return but also perform. Now, me personally, I'm pretty optimistic. I think a lot of people, they take a big clump of what we saw from J.C. Jackson, and that's his identity, right? That's how we define him. He was underwhelming. He was allowing big plays. He wasn't very consistent. This is a huge bust. That could end up being the case. But me personally, I saw a corner being turned in his last week, maybe 2 weeks, on that defense where he was making a big impact. He was making big plays, and it felt like he finally was beginning to find his footing. Whether it be him adopting the new scheme on defense or even Brandon Staley changing the defense to better adhere the talents that he had at DB, something was happening. Something was moving. And then fate swooped in and took JC from our grip and not letting us see what kind of potential he had for the rest of the year. So a lot depends on what version of JC we get back. Will the injury play a long-lasting effect? Is he not going to be the same player ever again? Or is he going to overcome that and pick up where he left off in terms of adopting the system and finding success? If he does, the Chargers are looking really good. If he doesn't, it's going to be an interesting situation for the Chargers. Now, let's say even outside the JC situation, we got Michael Davis to consider, who's on contract for just one more season. That also is something that might push the Chargers in considering a corner in this draft. And if you take a look at recent mock drafts, there's some pretty good guys out there around the Chargers pick at 21. Some big, physical, fast dudes who I think can make a big impact on this team going forward. Probably the biggest to note is Joey Porter Jr. I think that guy in a Chargers uniform could end up being very, very nice. But a lot depends on how the Chargers view this position, J.C. Jackson's return, and how they view the Mike Davis situation going forward. So again, don't be shocked if the Chargers do consider a cornerback in the upcoming draft. Last couple positions here, safety. And this might be one of the more shocking you'll find on the video. We got Derwin, Alohi, and JT Woods. We got a couple guys in the background too, but that's pretty much it of the notable names. Now, strong safety, obviously. We'll say, that side of the field, that feels fine. We got Derwin James, probably the best safety in the league. We got Alohi Gilman, who is certainly stepping up. He really began to shine halfway through the season. I'm very optimistic in what Alohi can offer. But what about free safety? We're probably moving on from Nasir Adderley, who's currently, a free agent. That's going to be something the Chargers got to sort out. Do they want to bring back Nasir? I don't know if they do. I would actually lean towards more, probably not. I don't know if I expect him to be a Charger this upcoming season. So what do the Chargers have? They got JT Woods back there, and that's pretty much it. JT is a raw, unproven talent. Maybe there's something going on in the background where the coaches are like, yeah, all right, this is what we drafted him for. We're going to let him sit. We're going to develop him in his first season. Then we're going to roll him out the next year to replace Nasir Adderley. We know his talent. The fans don't. The general public does not. JT Woods has got something serious to offer here. And that's probably the best case scenario. Awesome. We got a guy back there. They're prepared. We don't need to go throwing down draft capital or free agent, money to address the situation there. But I'm telling you right now, I think they do. I think the Chargers need to go out there and find the guy. And I think more likely than not, it could come through the draft. And you guys ask, well, director, we got so many other big things that could affect the team more, right? We got wide receiver. We need speed. Bijan Robinson would be huge. Edge would prepare us for the future. There's so many things you can do at 21. Why go safety? Well, I'll tell you right now, Staley's scheme is wildly dependent on safety play, and more specifically, that position's versatility, right? If we see a guy like Brian Branch fall, which is absolutely possible, if we see other guys in the second round become a priority, be prepared. Be prepared for the Chargers to target free safety, because that is a position that is hugely important to this defense. I don't think Nasir Adderley was living up to that expectation, but imagine if we had JT Woods that entire time, who certainly wasn't looking great. He was looking like a rookie out there. It could have been a lot worse. And I think the Chargers and their defense, like we talk a lot about speed on offense making a huge difference. I think getting a stud at opposite safety of Derwin James could make a huge effect on the defense as well. I think that could make probably one of the biggest differences you can make on defense, getting a guy opposite Derwin. So keep that in mind, guys. We need a free safety, and it's a position that this team really depends on for their system to work. So keep that in mind. There's some guys in the draft, I think, in the second and third round that could certainly step in and make an impact, but we are still talking about a rookie stepping into that role. There's very few rookies I feel comfortable with that in. I would say safety could also take a priority in free agency as well. If the Chargers spend any, I would say, more than significant money on a position, it could end up being safety, because that's how important I think that position is going to end up being. So keep that in mind. Very last position we're going to cover here is special teams. And again, this is something that might throw some people off. We've got Dustin Hopkins and Josh Harris. That's pretty much it. We need a punter. J.K. Scott ended up being one of my favorite special teamers of the Chargers last season. He's been absolutely fantastic. We got to re-sign him. Of course, you got Cameron Dicker, the sensation at kicker, right? He would need to be re-signed as well. Now, what's more likely going to happen is that the Chargers cut Dustin Hopkins, save a little bit of money there, re-sign Cameron Dicker for a lot cheaper. But that only solves one issue. The Chargers need a punter. The Chargers need a returner, which also pays dividends to maybe justifying the Chargers pick at wide receiver coming up this season. Tank Dell, man, that would be a heck of a pick for the Chargers in terms of addressing that need at wide receiver, especially going forward, as well as maybe special teams. And that's something that I do expect to see this year. I almost fully expect to see wide receiver at some point in this draft. And I do think they're going to play a lot of special teams, but more often than not be thrown in there as your speed guy. So just look for a speedy wide receiver this year. It could address a couple issues, but special teams definitely has some things that need to be sorted out. All right. So in the comment section below, let me know your guys' biggest concerns. I'll say we kind of, unearthed some of the things that the Chargers need to focus on in terms of, filling in talent for linebacker, preparing ahead at edge, maybe cornerback, and then backups like, quarterback. That's something that's going to need to be addressed this offseason. So let me know some of the biggest things you think the Chargers should address. I would say early in the NFL draft, and then maybe a few positions that you would address via free agency. Some of the biggest guys I think that you can get in free agency, we already know the big three, Tranquil, Morgan Fox, and Trey Pipkins. Hopefully one of those guys at least returns. But the guys that don't, those positions are going to need a little bit of attention. So keep that in mind as we continue forward with our off-season content, especially with the NFL draft. It could really dictate the next couple of weeks in terms of free agency and some of the news that we hear, how the Chargers attack the draft as a whole. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you like what you saw here, hit us up with the like and sub on your way out. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Man, I gotta tell you right now, dudes, even with all that said, I think I still want Dalton Kincaid in the first round.